The trouble started with a stapled notice on my brand new cedar fence that read, "Violation unapproved fence must be removed within 10 days. HOA Compliance Officer Vanessa Strickland." I stared at it for a good minute, trying not to laugh. My name's Jonah Neely. I'm a contractor by trade, own a modest 3-acre lot on the edge of a suburb called Crystal Pines. Hadn't even wanted to be part of an HOA, which is why I bought just outside the boundary line. Or so I thought. The fence sat exactly where my survey said my property ended. I double-checked it before I even poured the posts. But Vanessa, the HOA president and self-declared protector of neighborhood aesthetics, wasn't having it. She marched up my driveway that same afternoon, sunglasses pushed high onto her helmet of blonde curls, clipboard in hand like it was a badge. "You're going to need to take that down," she said, without so much as a hello. "It violates our covenant guidelines. 6 feet is too high and the wood isn't pre-approved." "Vanessa," I said, "I'm not in your HOA," she blinked. "Your fence backs up to Crystal Pines. That makes it visible from our subdivision. Which means it falls under our visibility clause." I'd never heard of that kind of nonsense in my life. "You don't get to make up laws just because you don't like my fence." She narrowed her eyes. "You'll be fined $100 per day until it's removed." I should have laughed, but I didn't. Because I could tell from the way she held that clipboard that she meant it. The next morning, I had a lovely little envelope shoved under my door. "HOA fine notice $200. That's when I got serious. I dug out my surveyor's report again, and something started itching in the back of my mind. The coordinates on the plat map didn't just include my land. They stretched well past the decorative stone wall that marked the entry to Crystal Pines. So I paid another surveyor, my buddy Darren, who owed me a favor to run a GPS scan on the lot lines. He called me 2 days later and said, "Jonah, you're not going to believe this. Their whole subdivision, it's sitting on your land." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "No, I'm dead serious," Darren said. "The original developer's plat must have been wrong. Everything from the welcome sign to the back cul-de-sac is about 30 feet over the actual boundary. And get this, the HOA's common area pool is smack in the center of your parcel." Turns out, 20 years ago, the builder who developed Crystal Pines messed up the legal filing. Badly. And no one caught it because the county records never got updated. But the deed, the actual title, still showed the land as part of the original farmstead my property was built on, which meant technically, legally, I owned it. So when Vanessa showed up again 3 days later with a printed list of escalating fines, I handed her a copy of the updated survey with a sticky note on top, "You're trespassing." She looked at it, looked at me, and said flatly, "This is a joke." "Nope," I said. "I'll give your HOA 30 days to vacate. After that, I start charging rent." She turned red. "You're bluffing?" "You sure about that?" She stormed off without another word, but I knew she wasn't done. A week later, I got served with a lawsuit. Apparently, the HOA was suing me for unauthorized land use and interference with community property. I grinned, because if they wanted a court date, I was happy to give them one. The courthouse lobby echoed with the sound of Vanessa's heels as she marched across the tile. Her lawyer, a wiry man in his 50s with a widow's peak and a perpetually pinched expression, trailed behind her, flipping through a stack of papers. I watched from the bench near the clerk's office, arms crossed, waiting for the hearing to be called. My attorney, Marla Hines, had the kind of calm that made snakes nervous. She'd spent 15 years litigating land disputes for farmers and ranchers before moving into private property cases. When I first showed her the title records and the surveyor's report, she raised one eyebrow and said, "They're going to regret every single letter they taped to your fence." The bailiff called our case, and we filed into the small courtroom. Judge Toland sat behind the bench, a man whose reputation for patience was matched only by his intolerance for frivolous lawsuits. Vanessa took the plaintiff's table with her lawyer. Marla and I sat at the defense table, a thick binder of property maps and legal documents between us. Vanessa's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "the defendant has constructed a fence that clearly obstructs the aesthetic harmony of the Crystal Pines subdivision. The Homeowners Association has well-established covenants that apply to all properties visible from the community, and we assert that his property, though technically adjacent, falls under those guidelines due to visibility and historical usage." Judge Toland didn't nod. He just adjusted his glasses and said, "You're asserting authority based on visibility." "Yes, Your Honor. The HOA's covenants let's move to the counterclaim," the judge cut in. "I've reviewed the preliminary documents filed by the defense." "Mr. Neely, you're asserting full legal ownership of the land currently occupied by the Crystal Pines subdivision." "I am," I said. "I have the original deed, as well as a recent survey confirming the legal boundaries." "The subdivision was built on the assumption of a flawed plat filed nearly 2 decades ago." Marla stood and handed a copy of the updated survey to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. "You'll see here, Your Honor, that the original plat filed by Whitefield Developments in 2003 misidentified the western boundary. The mistake wasn't caught during development, but our survey, confirmed by a county-licensed engineer, shows that approximately 11 acres including the HOA's pool, clubhouse, and several residential lots are legally within Mr. Neely's deeded property." The judge leaned forward. "And this deed has never been transferred or encumbered?" "No, Your Honor," Marla replied. "Mr. Neely's property was subdivided from the original farmstead in 2007, but the deeded boundaries remained intact. We believe the subdivision encroached due to a clerical error that was never reconciled with the recorded title." Vanessa burst out, "That's absurd. We've lived there for years. You can't just take it back." The judge raised a hand. "This isn't a matter of duration, Miss Strickland. It's a matter of legal ownership. Please let your attorney speak for you." Her lawyer looked rattled. "Your Honor, even if there was an error in the original development, we argue that adverse possession applies. The homeowners have maintained and used the land continuously, openly, and under the belief that they owned it." Marla nodded. "We anticipated that argument, but under state law, adverse possession requires payment of property taxes for at least 15 years. The HOA has never paid taxes on the disputed land Mr. Neely has. We've included certified county tax records in our exhibit." The judge examined the documents for several minutes in silence. Then he sighed, leaned back in his chair, and said, "I'm going to need a full title history and a hearing on the adverse possession claim. But based on what I'm seeing, the HOA has been operating on land it doesn't own." He paused. "And issuing fines for fences on property outside its jurisdiction." Vanessa's lawyer cleared his throat but said nothing. The judge looked directly at Vanessa. "You're lucky Mr. Neely hasn't filed a trespassing complaint." Yet, back in the hallway, Vanessa glared at me like I'd just burned down her house. "You think you've won," she hissed. "We'll bury you in motions. You don't understand what you're playing with." "I think I understand more than you do," I said. "You're not just wrong. You're exposed." Her lawyer tried to usher her away, but she shook him off and walked out in a fury. 2 days later, I got a call from a guy named Alan Chu. Said he lived in Crystal Pines on Sycamore Ridge Lane and wanted to talk. We met at the diner off Route 39. He slid into the booth looking nervous. "I heard about the court case," he said, glancing around like someone might be listening. "Vanessa said you were trying to extort the neighborhood, but I checked the county maps. You're not lying." "I've got no interest in extorting anyone," I said. "But I'm not going to let them bully me off my own land," he exhaled and nodded. "Good. Because I think you should know she's been hiding things. The HOA's been using community funds for private events, trips, dinners. She approved expenses without board votes. A few of us tried to push back, but she threatened to fine our properties for yard violations and unregistered additions. You got proof of that?" Alan opened a folder and slid it across the table. "Financial reports from the last 3 years." I used to be treasurer until she forced me out. She replaced the board with people who don't ask questions. I flipped through the pages, noting the line items: private catering, alcohol purchases, a decorative enhancement for her own driveway, all paid from the HOA's operating account. Why come to me? Because if the court rules in your favor, she loses everything. And frankly, most of us wouldn't mind that one bit. Later that week, Marla filed a motion to compel financial disclosure from the HOA. The judge approved it. When the ledgers came in, it was worse than Alan had let on. Trips to a luxury spa resort, billed as board retreats. A $4,800 payment to a landscaping company owned by Vanessa's cousin. And nearly $9,000 in community improvement funds that went toward repaving her private driveway. We took it straight to the county prosecutor. By the time our next hearing rolled around, there were two new people sitting in the gallery. One wore a badge, the other carried a briefcase and a very serious expression. Judge Toland opened the session with a clear voice. I've reviewed the full title history. The land in question legally belongs to Mr. Neely and has since before the subdivision was constructed. Furthermore, the HOA's claim of jurisdiction over his property is without merit. I am issuing a declaratory judgment confirming Mr. Neely's exclusive ownership of the disputed parcels. Vanessa's face turned pale. The judge continued. Additionally, I have referred the HOA's financial practices to the district attorney. Misuse of community funds is not under this court's jurisdiction, but the documentation suggests serious ethical and possibly criminal violations. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. After the hearing, as we walked toward the parking lot, one of the plainclothes officers approached me. We'll be issuing subpoenas to the HOA board next week, he said. Looks like this goes deeper than just a boundary dispute, I nodded. Let me know if you need anything else, he smiled. Oh, I will. This whole neighborhood's about to get a wake-up call. 2 days after the ruling, a black SUV pulled into my driveway while I was cutting lumber out back. The woman who stepped out wore a charcoal blazer and carried a stiff leather portfolio. She didn't introduce herself right away, just looked over the property line, then down at the gravel under her feet. You're Jonah Neely, she finally asked. Yeah, and you are, Assistant District Attorney Weller. I'm leading the investigation into the Crystal Pines HOA. I need a few minutes. I set the saw down and wiped my hands on my jeans. Didn't expect the DA's office to show up on my porch. Well, she said, you don't usually see embezzlement wrapped in a land dispute. We sat at my kitchen table while she clicked open her portfolio. Inside were glossy color prints of invoices, financial statements, and a scanned copy of a check made out to cash signed by Vanessa Strickland. What am I looking at? I asked. Weller pointed to the check. This was cashed 2 months ago. The memo line says Community Event Security. Our records show no security company was ever hired. No permits were filed. And the bank that processed this check flagged it as suspicious. She flipped to the next document. We also found a wire transfer to a private account in the Caymans. The recipient was listed under a shell company tied to Vanessa's husband's consulting firm. Same firm that billed the HOA for over $20,000 in planning services that apparently consisted of a single PowerPoint presentation. I leaned back and let out a long breath. So this wasn't just petty fines and power trips. Not even close, Weller said. The HOA was used like a personal ATM, and now that your survey pulled the rug out from under their authority, the whole operation's unraveling. She snapped the folder shut. We'll be issuing warrants within a week. She left without asking for coffee, and I didn't offer any. That evening, a neighbor from 2 streets over Linda Cartwright knocked on my door. I'd barely spoken to her before. She wore a faded gardening apron and gripped a manila envelope like it was a life preserver. I heard what happened in court, she said, and I think you should have this. Inside the envelope were copies of emails, lots of them, all from Vanessa. Some were addressed to the board, others to individual homeowners. They were nasty threats of legal action, warnings of property liens, accusations of violations that didn't exist. One even included a draft letter to a bank, attempting to block a neighbor's home refinance by claiming they were under HOA investigation. "That's illegal, right?" Linda asked. "Absolutely," I said. "I kept them, just in case. She tried to fine us for a bird bath once. Said it attracted undesirable wildlife." I scanned the dates. They went back nearly 4 years. Vanessa had been using her position not to protect the neighborhood but to control it by any means necessary. The next morning, I called Marla. "You're not going to believe what just landed in my lap," I told her. By the time we submitted Linda's emails to the DA's office, the case had grown teeth. That Friday, Crystal Pines woke up to sirens. 3 unmarked vehicles rolled up to the HOA clubhouse just before sunrise. Officers in windbreakers moved with precision into the building, one circling around back. And evidence technicians snapped photos of the entrance, the mail drop, the keypad lock. The clubhouse door was propped open while boxes were loaded into a van. I stood across the property line, arms crossed, watching Vanessa being led down the clubhouse steps in handcuffs. Her expression wasn't rage anymore, it was disbelief. Her lawyer wasn't with her this time, just 2 officers, one on either side, guiding her into the back of a cruiser. A neighbor, tall guy, always walking his golden retriever, stood beside me. He didn't say anything at first, just let out a low whistle. "She always made us feel like we owed her something," he said. "Turns out she was the one doing the stealing." I nodded. Hard to keep up the illusion when the spotlight hits. That afternoon, a meeting was held at the elementary school gymnasium for all Crystal Pines residents. I was invited as a guest technically, still the legal owner of the land under their feet. The crowd packed in. Folding chairs filled every row, and people stood along the walls. 2 county officials addressed the room and confirmed what most already suspected. The HOA was officially dissolved, pending criminal prosecution. A temporary committee would manage basic upkeep until a long-term solution could be established. I didn't speak until near the end when someone in the back asked, "So what happens to our homes now?" I walked up to the mic. "You're not getting evicted," I said. "That was never my goal. I just wanted my property rights respected. I'm working with a land use attorney to negotiate a lease agreement with the county. You'll have the option to buy your parcels back at fair market value or pay a small annual lease fee to keep your homes where they are. No hidden fines. No trick clauses. Just transparency." The room was quiet for a moment, then someone clapped, then more. Soon the whole place was on its feet. After the meeting, a woman approached me in tears. Said she'd lived there 12 years and had always felt like a guest in her own yard. Thanked me for standing up when no one else could. That night, I sat out on my porch, the stars just starting to punch through the sky. The fence still stood right where I'd built it, sturdy, level, and entirely mine. A car slowed along the edge of the road. It paused near the stone wall that used to mark the HOA boundary, then rolled away again. No one left another notice on my property after that. 2 weeks later, Vanessa was indicted on 6 felony charges, including wire fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction. Her husband fled the state, but was picked up in Arizona trying to withdraw nearly $50,000 in cash. The county filed to seize the HOA's remaining assets. The clubhouse was auctioned off, the funds split among residents who'd been overcharged. Marla negotiated a revised plat with the zoning office, redrawing the subdivision boundaries to match the corrected legal lines. For the first time since it was built, Crystal Pines matched the map. Alan Chu helped form a new neighborhood council, voluntary, transparent, and with no authority to fine anyone for flower colors or mailbox height. He even asked if I'd like to be honorary chair. I declined. Told him I preferred to fix things with a hammer, not bylaws. The land dispute had started with a fence, but it ended with a neighborhood freed from a shadow they didn't even know they were living under. And I kept the fence exactly as it was. Every nail in that wood was a reminder that sometimes standing your ground means more than just holding a line. It means turning it into something no one can take from you, not with a clipboard, not with a gavel, not ever again. 3 months passed. In that time, the remnants of Crystal Pines underwent a kind of forced evolution. The HOA was gone, its name scrubbed from the subdivision entrance, its bylaws archived and boxed up in the county's legal archives. The stone wall at the edge of the neighborhood, once a symbol of exclusivity, had crumbled slightly in one corner from neglect. No one rushed to fix it. Probably no one missed it either. The homes remained, of course. So did the people. But gone were the neighborhood patrols, the warning letters about lawn height, and the surveillance van that used to creep by at dawn. In their place, Halloween decorations, impromptu block parties, and a sense of relief so thick you could feel it when driving through. I didn't hear much from Vanessa. No one did. Her bail had been denied once the wire fraud charge stuck. The DA's office confirmed she'd been moved to a holding facility outside of town, pending trial. Her name stopped coming up at community meetings. People were too busy adjusting to their new reality, one where they could plant a rose bush without fear of a fine. But just when I thought things were finally settling, I got a visit from a federal investigator. He arrived in a dusty sedan with government plates, wearing a rumpled brown suit and holding a folder marked with a black stripe across the front. His name was Agent Dorsey, and he introduced himself by holding up a badge and saying, "Mind if I come in? I've got a few questions about your neighbor's swimming pool." The folder contained aerial photos, some from a drone, others from satellite imaging. He laid them out across my kitchen table, pointing to a rectangular patch of shimmering blue I knew all too well. The Crystal Pines community pool. I raised an eyebrow. "Thought the county already went through this," I said. "It's on my land." "We've got that confirmed." "That's not what this is about," he said. "We received a tip from a former HOA board member, said the pool may have been installed without proper permits. That by itself wouldn't bring us here, but there's more." He tapped on one of the images. "This area here. That white box behind the clubhouse, it's not listed on any of the original plans." I leaned in. "That was a maintenance shed. Vanessa used to call it the compliance center." Dorsey frowned. "According to the tip, it wasn't used for maintenance. They said it was a records room. But not just for HOA paperwork. They claim it held files, financials, surveillance footage, even private documents collected on residents. Illegally." He pulled out a smaller photo, this one from a body cam. It showed a cramped, windowless interior lined with shelves. Banker boxes stacked to the ceiling, a single desk with a locked cabinet beneath it. They found the shed after the warrant was executed, but most of the boxes had been emptied. "We believe someone cleared it out a day before the raid." "That explains the SUV I saw leaving the night before," I muttered. "We think Vanessa had help," Dorsey said. "Specifically, a man named Simon Eckhart, former vice president of the HOA board." The name rang a bell. I remembered him vaguely, a lean man with a goatee and the kind of voice that always sounded like it was trying to sell you something. He'd avoided the spotlight during the court hearings, hadn't been listed on any of the financial documents. "I assumed he'd bailed early," Dorsey continued. "We believe Simon was responsible for setting up a digital surveillance system that logged activity across the entire subdivision. Hidden cameras, audio recorders, some installed without consent, including in private backyards." My stomach turned. "You're telling me they were spying on residents?" "More than that," he said. "The files that were recovered show patterns of blackmail, selective enforcement. Residents who pushed back found themselves fined, visited by code inspectors, or targeted with legal threats. We even found a spreadsheet listing vulnerability notes, personal information keyed to addresses, medical conditions, marital disputes, employment issues." I sat back in the chair. "That's not HOA misconduct, that's organized harassment." "Exactly. And we're looking at potential RICO charges." I stared at the photos, trying to process it. All this time I thought Vanessa's tyranny was about power, but it was industrialized control, a whole system built to keep people silent. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you blew the lid off it," he said. "Without your case, we'd have never looked deeper. We need you to testify at the federal hearing, not just about the land ownership, but about the retaliation, the behavior of the board, everything you witnessed." I agreed without hesitation. The hearing took place in a federal building 2 counties over. It wasn't a criminal trial, not yet, but a preliminary hearing to determine if full charges under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act could proceed. I sat in the witness box for over an hour, answering questions about the boundary dispute, the fines, the threats, the lawsuit, and the aftermath. Then they called Alan Chu. He brought his own folder. Inside were copies of internal emails from Vanessa and Simon, attachments showing camera placements, and even a list of passwords he'd discovered taped to the back of a filing cabinet during his last week on the board. One of them unlocked a cloud server. The server held over 30 hours of security footage, none of it from HOA common areas. The judge reviewed the materials in silence. When he finally spoke, his words were clipped and final. "This exceeds negligence. It exceeds overreach. If proven, these actions constitute a criminal enterprise operating under the guise of a homeowners association. I am authorizing a full investigation under federal jurisdiction." Within 2 weeks, Simon was arrested in a motel outside of Knoxville. He'd been using an alias and traveling under fake credentials. They found 3 encrypted USB drives in his suitcase. One of them contained a complete ledger of HOA payments, including off-book expenses labeled private compliance operations. The fallout was immediate. 4 more former board members were subpoenaed, 2 cooperated. 1 fled the state. The last turned herself in before the indictment dropped. The residents of Crystal Pines held a town meeting in the gymnasium again, this time to vote on whether to dissolve all remaining covenants and restrictions linked to the now defunct HOA. The motion passed unanimously. By spring, the subdivision had been reclassified as a standard residential zone. The county agreed to maintain the roads. I finalized lease agreements with the homeowners who wanted to stay, offering 50-year terms at a nominal fee to cover taxes and insurance. No strings. No surveillance, no bureaucracy. Alan Chu was elected to the new advisory board, not a governing body, just a liaison group to help coordinate trash pickup and street repairs. Their first vote: repurposing the old clubhouse into a community center with open access Wi-Fi and free classes on home maintenance. Linda Cartwright started a neighborhood newsletter. She called it The Fence Line. I read every issue, even when it was mostly recipes and garage sale ads. One afternoon in early summer, I got a letter from the office of the Inspector General. It wasn't formal, just a signed note on official stationery. It read, "Mr. Neely, in a time when most people would have torn down the fence and paid the fine, you stood your ground. Because of that, a community reclaimed its voice. Thank you." I folded it up and slid it into the drawer beside my tools. The fence still stood, weathered now but solid. I had no plans to replace it. Instead, I built a gate in the middle, a wide one, swinging both ways. Sometimes kids from the neighborhood wandered through to fish in the creek out back. Sometimes neighbors brought over pie or asked to borrow tools. No one ever asked me to move it again, and no one ever tried to tell me what my property meant, not after that.